Thank you so much for coming to check out another episode of the Stash Cast, where we have interesting conversations with interesting people focused on the world of commercial real estate and prop tech. The Stash Cast is brought to you by Needle. What if you could use data and analytics to predict real estate transactions before they occur? You can with Needle. Come check it out at needle, nedl.us to learn more. All right, today I've got my good friend Blaine Strickland here. Blaine, we have a full agenda, but why don't we start out? Why don't you give the listeners at home an idea of who you are and what you do?
Thanks, Tash. Glad to be with you. Glad to be reunited with you. I remember our time in Cincinnati together fondly,
Yep.
where I met your wife and kids. Let's see. An easy way to think about me is 4 decades in the real estate business. The first decade, I graduated with undergraduate and graduate degrees in real estate back in the caveman days. Very few schools had degree programs back then. The University of Florida had one of them, so that's where I went. And then my first decade I spent with CBRE. I was one of the first guys hired by CBRE when they came to Tampa, Florida in the early 1980s. Very interesting experience, strict territory based. And so I was a producer for several years, and then I moved into the management side. So at age 29, I moved to South Florida and spent 5 years managing a profit center. So I had 42 people reporting to me, of which 3 were older than me. So that was quite an experience. And then the second decade, I moved back to the Tampa Bay area where I was from and decided that I wanted to learn how to be a developer. I had earned many of my fees as a commission agent from developers. Tampa was exploding. All of Florida was really exploding in those days. So I spent 10 years working for big development firms, learned a lot about the development business, moved to Orlando at the end of the second decade to work on a big development project. And with that, became a developer myself. And so I spent 10 years working in the development field, syndicated my own projects, built my own leasing and management teams. And then at the start of the fourth decade, I decided I would follow a passion that I had for coaching. Both my dad and my grandfather were coaches and sports coaches. And for some reason that fit for what I did. I had been in so many different roles in so many different markets, so many different asset classes that I thought maybe I could make a contribution there. So really since the beginning of 2012, that's what I've done. So I'm really a coach now, personal coach now to top producers would really be the best way to describe what I do. A couple dozen clients and then pretty involved with their activities and then a handful of other activities as well.
That's awesome. I've always appreciated your approach and your perspective on things, especially given your background. It's illustrious, to say the least. So we've got an agenda today. And so the first thing we touched on when we were theorizing about how to do this podcast was you've got some thoughts on the current state of commercial real estate brokerage and disruption that you see coming down the pike. So maybe could you elaborate on that?
Sure. I have done my 23andMe, and I'm 98% Ireland, Scotland, England. I've been in this country for many generations. So here I am. I'm the original old white guy right here. And so that's the way I would talk about my career. When I started in the commercial real estate business, it was a lot of old white guys, very manual system. Things didn't really change for many years. You have to remember when I started at CB in the early 1980s, just remember back, no personal computers, no fax machines, no cell phones. So we were going down to the county courthouse and looking at microfiche machines under the supervision of a librarian so we didn't get the cards out of order. And so that's where we started. And for many years, things didn't really change that much. And then over the last several years, things have begun to change in many ways. Technology, of course, has changed. Demographics have changed. We have a younger, more diverse group now. Old white guys aren't the thing so much anymore. We can still make occasional contributions. So what happened to me as I began to coach is I began to think about first, how could I accelerate the productivity of the agents that I work with. That caused me to write the first book, Thrive. And then I started to think, wow, things are changing. And so I wrote the second book called Adapt. The subtitle of Adapt is Disruption is Coming to Commercial Real Estate Brokerage. Are you ready? And that book details some ideas I have about how I see things are going to change.
Yeah. So when we were talking about this, were the thoughts where it's less about, or it's potentially becoming less about the brand and more so about the individual, the relationships that you build. And I think you're cutting yourself short, but guys like yourself have tremendous relationships within the business that they built over many years. But maybe unpack that a little bit more about why it's the broker and not the brand.
Both are important. When I started at CBRE, as an example, CBRE was willing to hire, you're going to laugh at this, but in those days we had a secretarial pool. So you constructed your document, you gave it to someone in the pool to type. Some of those people had data bank responsibilities, which we would go out and by hand catalog buildings, and that would be typed into a format. So when you think about the way things have changed, I often like to tell the story of I was an office specialist. I was given a territory. There was a circle on a map. And I remember so clearly on the first day, it was one of those maps you reach up and you pull it down from the ceiling, and then you take the red grease pencil, and the manager looks at me and goes, what's your name again? Strickland, you see this circle right here? This is your territory. And we play zone defense here. Nobody goes in, nobody comes out without permission. Am I making myself clear?
Yeah.
That was day one. So I like to say I'm the first human in mankind history to publish the vacancy rate in my territory, because no one had ever done that before. And it wouldn't have happened without the investment of the big firms pushing into these kind of markets. And so for the first 5 years of my career, the reason I was so productive is I was the only one that had the data. I knew more about the market than any other human on earth, because I was the only one paid to do that. So that's the way it started. And I would say that over time, we've now reached the point where the data is really secondary. Any fool with a subscription fee can buy the data now. And so that's a massive change. First of all, everybody has the data. So it's not the data that distinguishes you anymore. It's the insight, the context that you give to that data. You know that yourself.
Yeah.
That's what makes you powerful today. Everybody knows what the vacancy rate is, but what you're talking about is what the trend lines, what's the most recent thing, what's the sentiment behind those trends, some of those kind of things. The second thing that's changed is that, going back to my CB days, is that CB was willing to hire a marketing specialist, as an example, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4, and would apportion that marketing specialist among 3 or 4 producers. So now, instead of the producer having to go get the listing and then come back and paint the sign, dig the hole, put the sign in, go to the printing place, there were many of my competitors that had to do that. With CB, we had a specialist in that, and we assigned that to somebody, and 2 days later we got our flyer back and somebody made a call and the sign was up. So that's the way it was. That's not the way it is anymore, which is because of the gig economy, meaning that you can hire a slew of highly skilled people online who do the job very well. You can pay them by the job, very a la carte. And so as a result, the producer themselves is more powerful than ever before because of the resources that they have available to them that once upon a time just weren't available. And I think that's the beginning of disruption.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting, because we were talking about kind of the difference between what I'm trying to create with Needle and your perspective on how you can set yourself apart as an individual. And what we're trying to do is have an extra tool in the tool belt, so to speak. But curious, don't you still, I guess you would agree. So when I first got started, I worked for this guy named Bruce Haynes, and he was in Southern California. And he had a grid system. They chopped up all of Southern California into grids, and he had a grid manual. And I used to have a copy. I don't know what I did with it. I wish I still did, but where this is your box. You need to know every single thing that's happening in and out of it. And so if somebody else gets a listing in your box, which sometimes happens, they got to split it with you, but you're supposed to have an encyclopedic knowledge of whatever's happening in your sandbox. And I think you're saying the same thing with the data's out there now. You can get it, but it's just, how do you read between the lines?
Yeah, I grew up in a strict territory system where it was my responsibility to know everything that was going on in my territory. And the way that we kept peace among all those agents is that there was a tariff. So you can come across the line and do something in my territory, but you have to pay me some proportion. If you want to engender goodwill and camaraderie and teamwork, then theoretically you would want to be a good teammate. In fact, 10 years ago, I worked with a firm, and I went into the office and they had all these signs everywhere. And what was on all these signs was "earn your tariff." And the idea is that people gladly paid that tariff because They wanted to stay with the prospect as they crossed the line. Those darn prospects just won't stay on the line. And so when they come across the line, then what you want is to be able to say to your prospect, hey, I got this guy's stash. He's a stone cold expert in this territory. We need to bring him in on this deal. And then the prospect would come to that immediate conclusion as well when you start talking. And that's the way it was. A territory system, particularly when the data wasn't widely available, that's the way it was. In today's world, I'm sure you do deals in multiple states. And then you're always trying to ask yourself, is it really worth it to pay Joe Smith 25% of the deal? Do I really need to do that? And it depends. It depends on what the firm rules are. It depends on licensing, a lot of different things. It didn't used to be that way.
Yeah. Yeah. There is that, the challenge of, and I think one of the challenges or downfalls of larger brokerage companies is that if they don't have those rules of the road clearly defined, it can easily lead to, no, this is mine. I brought this in, so I get a lion's share of it. And I'm doing all the work, can very easily lead to
there's a wide range
hard
of
feelings.
One of the benefits I get is I wander the country and I talk to people in different asset classes and different markets. And a couple of years ago, I worked with a guy who said, listen, I want to hire you to be my coach. And I said, okay, tell me your situation. He goes, I'm in a big office in a giant urban city, and we focus on multifamily. And there are 3 teams in our office that all focus on the same territory. And I'm the number 2 guy on the number 2 team. So I'm not sure what I'm aspiring to be. And I'm like, wait, all 3 of the teams focus on the same pool? And he goes, yeah. And so obviously the strategy there is every man for himself, whoever gets there first, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's, what am I supposed to do? Say that won't work? Are we supposed to give back the $25 million in commissions we made last year? So some people go at it from that end of the spectrum. Other people have very strict territorial approaches, and they can all work. Some are a little easier to stomach. Some require a different style. I think the big disruptor is that you can do that even as an individual if that's what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the characteristics that you've seen for what you've called the super producer, or that super producer mindset.
Rod Santomassimo, who's a friend, and I have talked about this from time to time. And by a variety of estimates, there's about 100,000 people in the United States that claim to be full-time commercial real estate agents. And our estimate is only about 5% of those people expose themselves to coaching. What's interesting is that if you take the top 5% of that 5%, so 5% of 2 million is 100,000 people, 5% of 100,000 people is 5,000 people. And if you looked at those 5,000 people, that you would see a dominant proportion of them are coached and have chosen to be coached. And it's like any other sport. All the professional golfers are coached. Every professional athlete that you can think of has multiple coaches. So if I look at it and say, oh gosh, if everybody was coached, they'd be a top producer. It actually works the other way. Like when the student is ready, the coach appears. And what I mean by that is there are a small group of people who are highly motivated, highly organized, and determined to create a moat, a competitive advantage that distinguishes them from the rest of the crowd. And when you find those people, it's a joy to coach them because they are constantly looking for ways to distinguish themselves, and they are willing to do the work that it takes to get there. Someone said to me a long time ago, it's easy. Successful people do the things that unsuccessful people won't do. And that's true. There's a group of people out there that are willing to work hard to create that extreme advantage, if you will. What's so great about commercial real estate brokerage is the compensation for that extreme moat is remarkable.
Yeah, I see all these memes on, not even memes, but inspirational quotes on Instagram, like about going to the gym. And it's like the gym membership shouldn't be an expense. It should be thought of as an investment. And coaching, I certainly have found, is a huge investment, and it pays off tremendously.
Yeah, I wasn't really making that comment to say that it's about me. Gosh, if you guys would just hire me, you would do better. It's actually about you. I can't. One of the things we've learned many times is that coaching doesn't work unless the player has skin in the game. So the worst call I get is the manager calls and says, hey, yeah, we got this guy and he's a top producer. And listen, we got to find a way to keep him because he's got to go to another shop. So I want to pay for coaching for him. And I'm saying, I can't help you. if the player doesn't have skin in the game, which is a decision you make on your side of the ledger before you ever call me, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah. I see it in my kids' sports. There are players who are phenomenal, but they're almost too good for their own good, and they just don't take it seriously. And it's the same thing, is if you don't take it seriously, it's not going to do you any good. That's why you have to have skin in the game.
One of my favorite stories about Caitlin Clark, you may have read it, is that when she was 8, 9, 10 years old, she was so good that she said, "Dad, I want to play in the boys' leagues." So they moved her over to the boys' leagues, 8 to 10, whatever, AAU, whatever, and she was the best player there. So she constantly tried to find ways to create more competition for herself. And you can just tell by looking at her that she has launched an uncountable number of balls into the air. She
Yeah.
has dribbled behind her back more times than anyone could count. And that's someone who just burns to get better. And there's the proof. And she burns to get better, and she matches that with some extraordinary talent. And that's what makes these top producers.
Yeah. It's the Michael Jordan effect. He's had not effect, but phenomenon or instance where how many free throws did he shoot in the gym by himself to be able to just nail it every single, or Kobe, or pick your superstar.
Yeah. We're in the same, our sport's the same. There are some smart things that I think top producers do. As an example, one of the things that I think top producers think about, I think their currency in some ways is what I would call top of mind status. So one of my favorite stories is I was working with the group, and they had a top producer, and they hired a young guy, and they put the young guy next to the top producer. And after 30 days, I showed up and I said, "So what have you learned by sitting next to the guy?" And he goes, "Nothing." I'm like, "Really? You sat next to the top producer for a month and you didn't learn anything?" He goes, "Yeah, I didn't learn anything." And I go, "Could you expound on that?" And he goes, "He sits there and his phone rings all day, and he takes all these calls, and he navigates and he negotiates and he gets all this stuff done. I stare at my phone, it never rings." And so my point of that is that what I find in the top producers is that their currency is top of mind status. So they constantly think in terms of making those deposits in the relationship bank with an identified group of people. And the theory is that I think what they would say is you can't call them on the day they need you. Like "Oh, it's so amazing you just called. We just had a meeting. We're looking for someone to handle this for us," said no prospect ever.
Right.
But when they have those meetings, because they do have those meetings, then they're like, "I got a guy. I got it. I got a boss. I got a guy." And then they run down the hall and they call. And so they invest in that so heavily that they have a lot of inbound business. They have a lot of repeat business. They get a lot of referrals. Their business is actually fairly predictable because they've been talking to people for so long. They know that the Jackson agency is going to sell that property sometime before the financing expires in September. And they know that's the card they're playing for. So it's almost like an off-market deal. It's like you learned about it before the market did.
Yeah.
And that's where they traffic. And so I would say that's one of the most extraordinary distinctives of top performers.
Yeah, I agree. It is about being top of mind so that when somebody's ready, it's just like a residential agent, right? Like when somebody's ready to sell their house, or in our case, sell their investment property, you want to be the first guy that the prospect thinks, or girl thinks, "Oh, I need to call them because I know that they know the market and are in touch with it."
Yeah, it's just like a home repair. If I come to you and go, "Oh man, my toilet's all backed up. It's just a mess." And then you say, "Hey, I got a guy." I'm like, "Give me his name. I'll take him." In other words, it can even be transferred. In other words, and it's so interesting to me that all of us who want a guy, could be guy or gal, but they want that person who's extremely good at something. So if your accountant is killer, then you got to give me your name, because I don't need anything. Just give me that person. And I think that's what top producers think about is, how do I become the guy? How do I position myself in that way so that I'm always identified as the guy? Everybody wants a guy. And yet when you see average or poor producers, they're like, "Hi, my name is Kevin. The market is hot. Do you want to sell?" And as a result, I feel bad for them. Dude, you're not really positioning yourself long-term to be the guy.
Right. I think that kind of lead the next 2 points of what we're going to be talking about dovetail is the dark side of brokerage, which is, let's just add more to your team, the horizontal versus kind of vertical growth. So could you maybe expand upon your thoughts with those things?
Yeah, it's something that I've gleaned from coaching top performers. And I think you and I've had this conversation. So I'll just reconstitute it very quickly, which is, let's say that this guy Stash sells multifamily in the greater Ohio market. Is that, if maybe that's what you would say you do? And as you begin to make progress, I've got to get some help. So you bring some kind of operator, administrative assistant, some kind of person who can help you stay out in front of the prospect so that you're not spending your time on things that are not related to finding more business. So you find an executor of some form. And that helps. And it keeps you focused on outward growth. And then maybe the manager comes to you, or maybe you think you should do it. Maybe it's a conventional idea and you go, you know what I should do is I should get a junior broker so that I can maybe refer some junior things to them or things I don't want to do. Or maybe I can have them do executor type things, but not have to pay them. I just pay them some percent or whatever. And that's where the fuzziness begins to set in. And here's what I mean by that, Stash, which is, it's been my experience with top performers that if you are a finder, you can think about professional services as finder, minder, grinder as the sort of basic skeletal structure. I didn't invent that, but I love it and I use it a lot. And so what happens is when you start to think about additional junior brokers, in other words, you're starting to expand horizontally, what you're doing is you're adding to the finding staff or the staff of which you have expectations of finding. So if you had 4 guys, gals, the same, what I'm trying to say is that let's say each of them produces $200,000 and the house gets half and the team gets half and you get half of that. You make $25,000 from each of them. And like, hey, I made $100,000 I would have otherwise. That's accretive. That's scalable. That's a beautiful thing. And I would say, Stash, my theory is that in the amount of time it took you to govern those people and help those people and move them along, it's true. You made $100,000 more. But if you had turned all of those people into minders rather than finders, even if you had to pay them salary, you would have accelerated the super finder maybe an additional $1 million.
Yeah.
So vertical expansion with a super finder has proven in my mind to be more profitable than horizontal expansion. Now, the reason that happens is because most platforms want horizontal expansion. If you're the manager, I was a CBRE profit center manager, and if you have 40 cubes, you want someone in every one of those 40 cubes because you're thinking, even if they only make $100,000 and the company only gets half of that's covering desk costs. And we might lose Stash someday, and if we do, we need some bench strength. And so there's been this sort of conventional push toward adding more agents. And they say things to you like, we're going to pay for the guy and he's going to help you and you're going to be accelerated. Now, he does need a territory of his own, and we do want him to be a super producer at some point. And it's fuzzy logic. So that's a hard lesson. That's a hard issue for some people. Some people are more prepared to do that than others. But what I can tell you is there are a handful of super freaks, the people that are very high quality finders. Usually they're in boutique settings. And what they've done is there's one finder and some very serious minders. One of the most successful super finders that I found takes his minder with him to the very first meeting and says, Mr. Jenkins, get a good look at me because you're not going to see me from now on. I report to Jessica. You report to Jessica because she is the man. She can get it done. She's a killer. She does all these transactions. And we want her doing it because she pays much more attention to details. She's much more accurate. She's more quality oriented. She can deal with cranky buyers and sellers and title companies. And so they play in that way. And what that does is that super minder becomes very valuable and enables the super finder to leave that meeting and go right back to finding.
Yeah. You've just described almost every single brokerage firm I've been a part of.
For better or for worse.
Yeah. There's a large national investment sale firm that almost brags that we've trained everybody and then they leave us. But that's their game, is we'll train enough of them and retain enough and then let the others go off and do their own thing.
I'm familiar with a top 3 global life insurance firm, and they hire young people out of school, and they broadly say out of every 20, one will make it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're okay with that. So they'll invest in 20 people to end up with 1 agent. And that's a style and that's an approach, and that's an approach that they can use. Most of my clients come from much smaller, none of them are quite global. They're smaller organizations. So we have to make a very careful decision about allocation of resources.
Yeah. I excuse me, I built a team. I've built a team over the years, and it it is a bit of horizontal expansion, predominantly horizontal expansion, but then you layer in some juniors and they're on a salary at a certain point. And but yeah, it does become a split to the other members of the team versus just really, it's almost like going an inch deep, or I'm sorry, horizontal could be thought of as an inch deep and a mile wide, whereas the vertical expansion is an inch wide and a mile deep.
Yeah, the way I sometimes try to work with people to think it through, which is somebody will say to me, I found someone that I think is just going to be a unbelievable minder, executor, takes charge, has all the EQ that you would ever want. I really think this person could accelerate us. And then they say, but she costs $120,000 a year. And I say, so tell me what the problem is. $120,000 a year, that's $10,000 a month that has to be generated to cover that expense. And I go, yeah, but let's think about it this way. If that person takes 10 hours a week off of your table of what you have to do, and you're working, I don't know, 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, let's say. So 10 new hours a week is getting 20% of your time back. So if you start thinking about what you could generate in that additional 20% of the time that you get back, that's what the worth of that person is. So you should think about it as investment value, not the cost approach to value. I have to pay 120 to make sure he doesn't take a job with somebody else.
Yeah. I have found though that my teammates they have very complementary skill sets, and especially when it comes to because I'm a little bit dyslexic. I used to have to do everything on my own. And then now it's okay, we can sit in an underwriting meeting and I can and do rely upon their knowledge and opinions. So in defense of the horizontal strategy, that's what I've found.
I've seen horizontal strategies work where teams say, great, we're a corporation. It's all about the complementary skills. So the money comes in the top and then it goes to the Kachinko machine and everybody gets a proportion. So it's an all for one strategy. I'm okay with that. What I'm most pleased about is that what I would say to those strategies, to those teams, okay, so show me that org chart of what people do, and they show it to me, and I go, great. So this is the Kachinko machine. The money comes in the top and spreads to and they go, I said, do you feel good about every slot? Do you have excellence in every slot? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, then you're doing the right thing. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I think that's what we've tried to build within our team, is to have excellence in every spot. I guess back to the large, more national brands, we talked about they're theoretically just more concerned with covering desk costs, and their incentives don't always align with the top producer.
It's a mixed picture out there. And here's what I mean by that. If you Google what is the appropriate profit margin of a commercial real estate agency, you're going to find 15 to 20%, let's just say 18%. If the firm takes in $2 million, let's make it easier than that. Let's say $1 million. The firm takes in $1 million. 18% of $1 million, $180,000. So the manager's job is to take the $1 million in the top and get $180,000 to the bottom. It starts out that out of the $1 million, 60% flows to the agents. So there goes $600,000. And now there's $400,000 left to pay operating expenses and profit margin. So let's see, 400 minus 180 is 220. So as manager, I have $220,000 to spend on whatever expenses there are, salary, rent, insurance, marketing, whatever it might be, so I can get that 18% to the bottom. And that's what their goal is. That's what they're thinking about. So it's whatever split I have to give to you to get you to stay, and then how can I compress expenses so that I can get 18% to the bottom. And that's why sometimes you see saying, look, Stash, we hired Jessica. She is the best marketing specialist in the marketplace. And we have, it's true, 12 of you have to use her, but that's the way we have to do it to manage costs. And you're like, have you tried to get any work out of Jessica lately? There's 5 hound dogs hanging on her all the time. She's practically in tears because she's overworked and doesn't have any help. So she may be the best, but she doesn't get a chance to show that. And that's the kind of compromise sometimes you have to make at the platform level because you're governed by this profit margin expectation.
Mhm.
If you ran your own show, you might say, in fact, I kind of joke about the idea that you would go in and say, hey, manager John, listen, I'm going to change my split from 60% to 70%. So you'll be paying me 70% instead of 60%, but I promise I won't use Jessica anymore, because I can hire that person through Upwork and get somebody who cares about me deeply. They care about the stars. They get 4 stars, 5 stars. That's what they want to do. It's a la carte. They want to get it back to me as quickly as possible. They do nothing but work for these kinds of companies. And it's unbelievable what you can buy a la carte these days. And they're like, whoa, I can't let you go. There's no a la carte here. So there's some pressures on platforms that I think still run in a very conventional way, given what today's realities are.
It's funny you bring up the stars. I've often thought about what are some incentive systems that we could implement on our team that aren't directly monetary. Could we have a star system and I don't know if my guys would respond to that or my team would, but it feels like when you're in kindergarten, you want that gold star. Everybody wants that.
There's a lot of, it's interesting. There was almost a revolution 15, 20 years ago when Rate My Professor came out. In other words, this is Dr. Brenda Jones teaches Economics 101 at the university you're at, and you don't really have a choice. And yet these outside agencies rate her. And so now I don't want to take it from Brenda Jones. She only has 3 stars. And it's, wait, what? Remember I was saying 95% of the agents are residential agents. There's a rate by agent. So we're the ones that are not being rated by stars in many cases. And so it's, oh yeah, but we're professionals. Oh, have you seen the ratings of lawyers? There's ratings of lawyers that are out there. And we're fooling ourselves in a way that we haven't been really affected by that. So I think your point of trying to continue to figure this out is valuable. Now, there's every receipt that you get these days. How likely are you to recommend this to a friend? 0 to 10, you click on whatever, and it takes you through to 10 questions of survey. So the biggest retailers in the world are all constantly surveying their clients. We don't ever survey our clients.
You just gave me an idea for the next startup.
There you go. There you go. As you continue to progress on Needle, any app is got some kind of survey client satisfaction element to it, or not, or you die. The only question is if you'll know why you died.
Yeah. We've solicited feedback after sales, and sometimes it's like the check is already cleared on both sides. And so the motivation to ask for or then give feedback or whatever it is much lower. So that's what I've found in practice.
Here's an idea for you that you could think about. So I primarily work with more senior producers, people that have been in business for a while. It's not that I don't like newbies. It's just that there's other people who coach them very well. This is world headquarters.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that I sometimes ask when I'm first forming a relationship with someone, and I have to think about allocating my time. How much time can I give to any one client? And is this the kind of client that I can really help and make the most progress with? So here's a question for you, Stash, to think about, which is, one time I heard an economist address an audience, and he said, so if I could only ask one question about the economic health of your community, what would it be? And so all these people are raising their hands and he goes, let me tell you what my theory is. My theory is year over year household income growth. So think about an economy, think about a city, and then ask yourself from one year to the next, what is the household income growth? So let's just say it's $100,000. And then let's say a bunch of minimum wage workers move in, then the next year that income is going to be lower when you average it out, right? Or if you have a bunch of highly paid professional medical people, then it's going to go up. And so you could think about the community. Doctor says that. So Stats, if I could only ask you one question about your health, what would it be? Would it be your cholesterol count? Would it be your body mass index? Would it be your resting heart rate? What would it be? And so you can think about that. Doctors have answered that question for me. One of them said, If I take 1 drop of urine, 1 drop of blood, and 1 strand of hair, I can tell you 95% of what your health is. Okay, Stash, I'm trying to decide how healthy are you as a commercial real estate agent. If I got forced to ask only one question, the question I would ask is, what proportion of your revenue flows from repeat business?
Yeah, that's a good one.
So just imagine that you track that over 10 years. Hey, Stash, could you go back and recalculate that over your last 10 years? What would you want that to look like?
You'd want it would start off as small and then you'd want it to grow exponentially.
You'd want it to grow, and maybe I've had people say, yeah, but I wouldn't want it to be more than 60% because I always want new business, et cetera. But just imagine that it plateaued at 50%, then you would almost say to yourself, wow, I have a floor to my income.
Yeah.
If you look at my repeat business for the last 10 years, I've made $400,000 to myself each year for the last 10 years because of my repeat business. That really changes the way you operate the business.
So can we talk about that a little bit, the repeat business, because there's the implication in commercial real estate, and we're going off script a little bit from what we outlined, but the rule, the unwritten rule is I have to sell it with the guy that sold it to me. And okay, great. But I have not seen that play out, even with the people where I've heard that exact thing come out of their mouth, play out in my favor as much as I've seen it thrown up as a barrier or an objection to business. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it brings a couple of anecdotes to bear. I remember years ago talking to a guy who was a retail single tenant net lease merchant developer. And so I said, what does that mean? He goes, what it means is that I have a sort of a preferred relationship with a national drugstore. And he named that drugstore. And I said, okay, well, what does that mean? And he goes, what they do is they tell me these are the markets we'd like to be in. So we want to be in this one. And these are our site requirements. So if it meets these sites, bring it to us. We're going to do it with you. And I said, was that exclusive? And he goes, what do you mean by exclusive? I said, if someone else brings them a site, do they say, thank you for the site? And then they hire you? And he goes, oh, that drugstore, they do business with the devil for the right site.
Yeah.
So when I think about your business, multifamily, there is a tremendous amount of competition in your marketplace. And so these guys are getting pinged on all the time. So it's easy for them to say something like, hey, if you bring me a property to buy, when it's time to sell, I'll give it to you to sell. And then what you're saying is only the front half of that contract really worked. You bring it to them, and then somehow they're not there at the end. And then they say things like, oh, I didn't intend to, but then this guy brought me this thing and there was nothing I could do. And I exchanged into it. And you don't even do, you do exchanges. Okay.
Yeah.
And so there's always some kind of excuse like that. It's a little concerning from the standpoint that people would say those kind of things, but I think that's just the nature of the intense demand for the type of properties that you sell. I'm not sure there's an asset class that has more intense demand than multifamily, especially at the sort of 10 to 100 unit above the quadplexes and below the Northwestern Mutual portfolio.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. Just it's convenient to do that. I would say though that what I see top producers doing in those circumstances are using a variety of tactics. Number one, they create a lot of convening events. So they're seeing that person constantly. And that gives you the opportunity to say, now, where are we on Valencia Gardens? Because you've owned it for 2 years now and you just spent $500,000 in improvements. Why don't we harvest that thing? Okay, why don't we meet on Tuesday and talk about that? Or they'll even reach for the whole portfolio. So how do you find Valencia Gardens fitting into your portfolio? So they're constantly trying to get that early warning system so that when that call comes in, there was nothing I could do. The guy had a hot deal. It's off market. I had no choice. They say things like that. Then you're trying everything you can do to try to get that early warning system and make it so that at worst I got to call a guy before I can talk to you because I just saw him last week. And that's a possibility. Some people they'll work at relationships with the management company. Some people will work on the relationship on the debt side so that maybe, if the debt agent is related to you or not related to you, have some kind of early warning system. So I think your best defense is not what they say, but a good offense, which is constantly trying to find ways to intercept them. And of course,
Well,
one of the best is always to say, hey, you know what? I found something. I think you should take a look at it. Honestly, John, if I had the money, I would buy it. Now, I know you don't have any funds right now, but maybe we should talk about whether you should reposition yourself into this asset and get rid of Valencia Gardens. I know you've only held it for 2 years, but if you look at the future of these two properties, I'm liking this one, John. So you're constantly pulling them towards you rather than insisting that, hey, what about me? I thought you told me.
yeah,
Just they're like,
yeah.
oh, you stashed. I love you. You remember how I gave you $1,000 for that charity walk last year? I love you, dude. And it's, you know,
What you've just brought up, the convening that you mentioned was akin, or it's exactly what that junior producer was missing. The senior, he's always on his phone and my phone never rings. It's because what I've found, it's a flywheel effect. Like the more you're on the phone, I had 3 calls while we're here. The more you're outbound, the more you're going to be getting inbound. And what I found is if you make a bunch of calls in the morning, then you're going to have your phone blowing up all afternoon. And it's a flywheel effect, essentially.
yeah, I think I'd like to add the word targeted flywheel to it because
Yes.
the other thing that's so strange about top producers, if you sit near them and they start making calls, it's shocking how many they connect with. Yeah, in other words, if you take a junior guy and you give him a list of 100, he'll make 100 dials, and at the end of the day, you'll say, "How'd you do?" Is like 14 of them picked up the phone, and 5 of them immediately blew me off. And then here's my little ratio: I had 3 really good calls, and 1 guy agreed to talk to me in 90 days. You talk to a top producer, Bo Beery, that we both know. Bo will tell you that he sets aside, he's very regimented. He sets aside 2 hours 3 times a week. He makes those calls. And I'm only getting 6 or 7 calls done in those 2 hours. And it's because those darn prospects pick up the phone when he calls. They can see it on the on the caller ID,
Yeah.
or they recognize his number. And so what I would tell you about the flywheel effect is that if you want to make that work for yourself, the more targeted you make it, where there's a certain group of people that you want to talk to and you consistently are able to add value, preferably customized value, because you have notes and you remember what they own, and you remember their last time you talked to them, they're taking their daughter to Notre Dame, and you know what their hot topics are. And hey, I drove by the property the other day. The new paint looks fantastic. I mean, I'm so glad you got rid of that dog walk area. That was not the right entry feature. And so you're able to say things like that. So what happens is it builds on itself, and then pretty soon they don't want to miss your call because they know that it's a 50-50 proposition. You're going to probably ask them something, but they also want to ask you something, or they know you're going to tell them something that they're going to find interesting.
Yeah, I've said this. It's, you want to make sure that every time you make a call, an outbound call, that you've got something of value for them. It's the same thing.
Yeah, I can tell you that the reason you just got 3 calls is because you probably left a message like, "Hey, John, long time no talk to. I'm just following up. We had talked 90 days ago. I marked my calendar to call you. Last time we were talking about what was going to happen if that property ever sold, but did sell. Call me back and I'll give you the details."
Yeah.
And that's why that guy calls you back,
Yeah.
not because, "Hi, this is Stash. The market is hot. Do you want to sell?"
Yeah. No, I was pitching a development site we have, and it's a juicy one.
Yeah, but that's why people can't afford data. Even if they're not 100% interested, they know that it has impact on them. And what are their unit costs? When you're like, 200, and you're like, 200? How can they do that in today's rents? But that's the discussion they yearn for.
Yeah. Yeah, it's still access to that data. And that's what we're trying to do with Needle, is to be able to be in front of people with insightful data, and be in front of them so that, you sold it to me, but they brought me the right buyer at the right time. And sorry, I'll get you on the next one. That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Sure. That's the algorithm effect. If you were to go back to Adapt, which is coming up on 4 years old, at that point, the algorithm that I wrote about in Adapt is that they were trying to bring AI to valuation. You're trying to bring AI to what's going to sell, what points to sale. And if you think about that's an algorithm, right? It's been owned by the same party for more than 7 years. Those people are domestic. Those people have made a large capital improvement in the last 2 years. They've had rent growth of over 30% for the next 5 years. Being they turn red, they're eligible for sale. You should focus on that. 4 years ago, what we were focusing on is there a way to automate commercial appraisal?
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't automatically know if you have all these properties that are side by side, the rents can be totally different. The direct sales comparison approach, which works for tract housing, and the cost approach, which doesn't really help at all other than condemnation, you have to focus on the income approach. And so what all the algorithms have been trying to do is how can we speed up valuation based on what data we can observe? What are the indicators? And remember, any algorithm that's more than 50% predictive is considered to be successful.
Right.
It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be 95% predictive. It has to be 50% predictive.
I think even in what we're doing, if you can even just get 25%, because if it's okay, if you have to be talking to these folks anyway, and you just know which ones to spend your time on first, you still are doing all the other things. But if you're approaching with some insightful comments or have a reason to reach out, if that can get you like your email address, one more deal, that's the goal. That's what we're
Yeah,
trying to do.
I think that's going to be interesting in the rollout of Needle. If people buy it thinking that it replaces conversations, it's not going to work. In other words, just think about if 10 brokers who are new to the market all subscribe to Needle and all of them know that Mr. Jenkins' property, Valencia Gardens, could probably sell this year. He's like, why am I getting all these calls? Which could possibly drive him to like, Stash, I am getting all these calls. You got to help me. What is going on here? And so what I'm saying is if you don't mesh that together with a relationship in some way, you may come off as just one of many.
Oh, absolutely. I think you still have to do the things like convening and having value in reaching out to folks. It's just meant to be a tool to help augment what you're already doing. Because the other platforms that are out there, they're just, I call them encyclopedias. They list all the things, but they don't say, hey, this is maybe where you should go and spend your time. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, it's a worthy effort. I think it will be really interesting to see who becomes the best client for that. In other words, if all you do is go, oh, we found this bot that can send 10 emails a day to the ones that are highly likely and one email to the day that are not, so we consider ourselves to be flooding the market effectively, allocating resources effectively because we're sending 10 emails a day to the ones that have a score of 60 or above, isn't going to prove successful.
Yeah, it will be very interesting to see how it all plays out. So you had talked a little bit and we touched on a little bit about the power of convening. And when we were going over this, you're like, when was the last time you had lunch or coffee with a prospect? And I was like, probably not as often, not as soon ago as I should have. Maybe could you expand on your thoughts there?
Years ago, a book was written called Never Eat Alone, and it was written by a guy who was a big time syndicator. And he wrote it in 2005, and then he republished it, I think, in the last few years. And he talks about thinking about what he calls food and beverage opportunities as you should never eat alone. You should always be scheming, who am I going to put in that slot? Who am I going to put in that slot? Who am I going to put in that slot? And I like to say, so if there's 13 weeks in a quarter and 1 week is vacation, national holiday, so there's 12 weeks, 12 weeks times 5 work days, 60 days. So you could say there's 60 in a quarter, or multiply by 2 if you're doing breakfast and lunch, or 2 a day, whatever it is. So there's 60, maybe 120 opportunities. And one of the things that I could challenge you to do is to say, but if you were trying to use this targeted flywheel concept and you wanted to invest heavily in the people that were most likely to be valuable to you, to what degree would you allocate resources to a personal meeting, a food and beverage opportunity, or just a personal meeting in some way? And in today's world, it's so easy to send emails or use slide dial and you leave a message without having to do anything. and so I really do think that technology was pulling us away. And then I think COVID absolutely crushed it. And we fell into that. We don't go in anymore and nobody really expects it. And that could all be true. It just turns out that we're still humans. And every time we break bread, something happens.
Yeah, that's true. The biggest challenge though in my vertical is that not everybody's, most people aren't local. And maybe I should be spending more time on travel, but I find it so exhausting.
It is exhausting. I travel a fair amount. I go to where my clients are, and I'm getting older, and I'm telling you, travel is no fun. It is a young person's sport. And today, 50% of the time, the plane's not on time, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But what I would say is you still have to think about an allocation of resources idea. And here's 2 or 3 quick ways you could do it. Number one, they're going to go to the same trade association that you are. And so you're going to travel, they're going to travel. What effort are you making way in advance to pull something together?
Yeah.
Some people do that. The platforms do that. A lot of times brokers let that get away from them. Number one. Number two, if you know who all these people are, and it turns out that there's 10 of them in Atlanta or Charlotte or Chicago, then it's time for you to pick up your stuff and go to Chicago, and you figure that out. And then third, what I would say is, John, I know you're coming to town. Sooner or later, you're coming to town to see your property, Valencia Gardens, and here's the deal. I'm going to pick you up at the airport. I'm going to take you to the property, but I'm going to show you 2 other properties you need to be aware of. So the way this travel is going to work is that you're going to come see me. I'm going to pick you up at the airport. Don't let me find out that I see you on the street, because I'm going to pick you up and I'm going to take you there. It will only take you 45 minutes. I'm going to show you your property and how it stands to its 2 biggest competitors. Now, who's going to turn that down? No, I'd rather pay the 37 to Uber and not learn anything about the market.
Yeah.
So you can, if you're determined, you can find ways to convene.
Yeah, you're right. You are. We had,
and of course, you can always give flowers to the property manager and find out when the owner's coming the next time, blah, blah, blah.
that's a good, I haven't thought about that. That's a good thing to do. I'll put that on my list.
If you have a smaller group, the smaller your group, the more focused in you are, saying, I've got to convene with that guy. I'm going to convene with every client this year. If I forced you to do that, you would become creative.
Yeah, that's true. I like that. Forcing to convene. That's a good one.
I personally think, I'll tell you a real quick anecdote. I coach a guy in Toronto. He's very smart. He's engineer smart. And what we've learned is that the properties in Toronto don't churn that often. So he's calling these guys, and he's younger, they're older. I'm good. You got anything I can buy? And so I forced this guy, Shy. I said, look, tell me what you love to do. He goes, I love basketball. I said, great. Get the calendar out. Go buy 2 tickets to the Toronto Raptors basketball game. And he did, $600 each. And I said, great. I want the most expensive ones. Great. He blindly followed me, and he bought them. And it's like next Thursday. So he ended up having to make 8 calls in order to get somebody to take the seat next Thursday. So finally he gets a guy. Now he gets credit for all those people that he called and didn't come, but then the guy comes and they sit next to each other for 2.5 hours, and he leaves with a listing. Now, what is the ROI on $1,200? I've never found anything. If you said, sometimes I ask questions like this, Stash, I got good news and bad news for you. I've got to scratch off. I'm going to give it to you. And when you scratch it off, it says you win $100,000. Good news. Down at the bottom, though, it says you must spend it on your business. How would you invest that $100,000? And my constant message is there's no better ROI.
You're right.
How did this turn into a coaching session?
I know.
Why am I beating you down? It's not my goal, Stash. It's just that I feel so strongly, and I know that it pays off, particularly for top producers. The young guys aren't doing it. The new guys aren't doing it.
So let me ask you though, on that, on the power of convening, because we've had some clients that we have done that with. We've done things that they like, we like. It's all mutually agreed upon. And then we hear that, oh yeah, they're showing the deal that we sold to them through a competitor to a prospect buyer. Like, how do you control that? Or even worse yet, they're listing deals with competitors that weren't necessarily yours, but you had an unspoken, yeah, you got this when we're ready. So how do you combat that? Because that, to me, honestly, that has been one of the most frustrating things about these, what we call them at Capstone, our client for life events. Mm-hmm. Like, we'll go out and spend $10,000. We went, I won't give any examples of what we've done, but we've done some great fun things. And then you almost got to slap them on the hand, be like, what are you doing? Knock it off.
Couple things to think about. Number one, I would suggest that maybe you think holistically in terms of how this event fits into your strategy for that client. So let me rephrase that. What I find for the top clients that I coach, they have a unique strategy for each client. In other words, this guy likes to play golf, this guy likes the horses, this guy likes basketball, this guy drinks nothing but red wine. And so they have a unique strategy for each client. And if you're doing group events, as an example, you invite everybody to a watch party, the box, the golf, whatever it is, then you have to see that as part of a bigger recipe, which is great. You want to get them together. I find, as an example, when I get a lot of those people together, sometimes I get unbelievable results from introducing them to each other. And you actually get credit for that. In other words, when they meet another owner, some people say to me, oh, but then they'll just sell it to that guy without talking to me. I haven't found that. I found that they credit you with that relationship.
Yeah.
But what you might also have to do is, while you're wandering around, is saying, hey, listen, we're going to have a little small overnight investor symposium. We're going to have 10 guys come to a round table. We got this house on the lake, and we want 10 guys. Is that something you would be interested in? And we're going to hire a chef or do this or do that. But you can only come if you're willing to contribute. You have to bring a topic and then lead the discussion for 15 minutes around the round table. So what you're always doing is fitting it together and groping to create that unique strategy. So that's one thing you could think about. The second thing I would say is, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you spend $10,000 and you invite 30 people and you get one deal that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten, the return on that is still $10,000 out, $100,000 in.
Sure.
And to focus on the guy that you lost may be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which is, yeah, we lost that one, but maybe we got one that we wouldn't have otherwise gotten. Are you doing a holistic analysis there? You can think about it. You can think about it.
I think you're right. There does need to be more of a holistic approach to those interactions and events and convening, as opposed to, all right, let's just do one client for life thing. And it's now you have to have a holistic plan. Just like
the other thing is, if you keep convening, then eventually you get that opportunity to say, hey, John, let me get you another drink. And he goes, I think I've had enough. No, John, I'm going to get you another drink, red or white. And then you give him the red and you bring it back. And you're like, John, I'm giving you this second glass of wine because we need to have a frank conversation here, bud. I'm bringing you my best properties, and then I find I don't get the opportunity. Is it my breath? And so what I'm saying is, it does give you the ability to enter into those discussions, which you could never enter into without exactly that right moment. You can't do it on the phone. You can't send an email. You can, and some people do. They're like, I can't believe you did that. And they put it in writing, and it's, dude, you just made a giant withdrawal out of the trust bank.
Yeah.
So sometimes those convening events give you the opportunity to approach topics that you wouldn't otherwise get to. You got to find the right moment.
Yeah.
Hey, Bill, we got a big property coming out. We're so excited about this listing. I think you'd be perfect for it. I'm willing to call you first, but we do have the matter of Valencia Gardens. What should we do about that, John? You have to play those cards gently, but you can send a message in that way. Sending an email and being pissed and taking them off lists, yeah, you can do that. You win the battle and you lose the war.
I'm just thinking about some interactions I've had.
But you have the personality for it, Stash. In other words, if you're not getting up next to them and being able to have the light touch and a little humor, you're a good-spirited guy, you're a good-hearted guy, you're a glass half full kind of guy. And I would say that's a competitive advantage that you have to press. I fail to see how you can do that on the phone or on email. You need to be sitting next to. I remember still to this day the dinner that you and your wife and I went out to, the steakhouse that we went into, and it was like you knew the guy. Hey, come on, be my friend. It's like, how many years ago was that? And I still remember that.
Yeah. That's honestly, that's one of the reasons I started this podcast, is because when I'm on the phone, I'm very, I call myself a mercenary. Like, I'm very focused. Do you want to buy this property or not? Because if not, I got to find the guy that is. And I think that it's a sharp edge that doesn't, it almost betrays actually who I am as a person. And so I did this as a way to flood people's LinkedIn accounts with the shorts that, oh, he's actually a nice guy. He's a person, or I like to think of myself as a nice guy.
Yeah, let me overlay the convening idea, which is if you're convening with people, say once a quarter, and you're talking to them and you call them, say, John, Stash here, man. Listen, I'm in grinder mode. My goal is to make 25 calls today. So I'm trying to figure out whether you want to buy this property. You remember when we were sitting out on the dock out there? Remember that, how you told me this is something you really want to do? So I'm calling you and I need a quick yes or no. Okay, great. Listen, are you going to be at the round table next month? If you can have, you can get that quick action, you can press for it, but if you cloak it in the bigger relationship, see you last time, see you next time, how's Janet, because you stood next to Janet for an hour and a half,
Yeah.
it's a whole game changer.
Yeah, it is. Pivoting a little bit, we glossed over it, but
Sure.
maybe you could talk about your style, particularly in coaching, as well as the other services that you offer to your clients on a more boutique or bespoke basis.
Well, I've played many different roles in the industry. I was a producer, then I became a agency manager, and then I raised money. I worked as a senior vice president of development, and I played a lot of different roles. And so that makes me valuable to a lot of different people. I think when you combine that experience makes me valuable. Then when you combine the fact that my favorite work to do is working on bigger, more complicated issues, solving puzzles. It's not the most profitable way to coach, but it's what's most interesting to me. I would say that if you, so, but hey, I've made a contribution. I've been a CCIM instructor for many years, and so I've taught CI 101 across the world and taught many people how to calculate cap rate and internal rate of return. So I'm a believer in that, but I'm a believer in it through that channel. You pay, a group of 25 people come together, we learn together. I enjoy it tremendously. I love the lights going on, and that's what I'm doing for that week. But in the rest of my world, I like to work on big, hairy, complicated issues, which are things like people call me. I had a guy call me one day and say, Blaine, I have an offer here on my desk for $7.5 million to sell my firm. Should I take it? And I said, are you asking me to negotiate the $7.5 million, or are you asking me what are you going to be when you grow up? And he goes, oh, totally the latter. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I had a guy call me one time and goes, Blaine, I make $500,000. I'm 40 years old. I make $500,000 a year in commercial real estate commissions. But when I'm 50 years old, I want to make $500,000 a year in passive income. But I don't know how to migrate from my full-time job earning commissions and helping other people to trying to acquire real estate. I spent 20 years trying to figure out how to make that change and moving from agent to syndicator, et cetera. Those are the kinds of things that are interesting challenges for me. What that's enabled me to do is build a business that has usually a very short, very specific scope. So we work to move the needle from here to here, and when we're done, it's not every other Tuesday for the rest of your life. When we're done, if you're happy, great, call me again when you need me. And so that makes it interesting too, because I never really know what's going to come next, but I'm okay with that. People call me when they need me, and a high proportion of my revenue from as coach flows from repeat business. Someday you'll hire me again. And when you do, I'll be here and I'll be ready. And I hope it's big and hairy. I hope it's fun. If you say, hey, I want you to train my 3 new guys to go from not being licensed to learning how to talk on the phone, then I'm going to say, you know what? I totally respect that. There's a lot of people do that better than me. Call these 3 people.
Yeah. Yeah, fair. It's know your worth and what you're good at. And you definitely are good at the big, hairy, audacious goal, strategic thinking. So,
well, at my age and stage, that's the way I choose to spend my time. That's what's fun for me.
that's great. So as we are wrapping up, we had talked about some other disruptors in the market, things like tokenization and crowdfunding and things like that. What are your thoughts on those, and where is it taking the commercial real estate industry?
There's definitely some aggregation of technology. You think when I syndicated 20, 25 years ago, you were not allowed to talk to 2 people at the same time. You had to talk to you had to do one by one. And the first question had to be, are you a qualified investor? Oh, you don't know what that means? It means you qualify under one of these 3 conditions. Would you pick one? Okay, great. Would you sign right here? Okay, now here's the property. That's the way we had to do it a long time ago. And it was because we were talking about sizable investments, and the SEC wanted to make sure that everybody was clear on whether the person you were talking to had the ability to discern what was being presented, so that you weren't taking advantage of people. I'm not unhappy about that. It's fair. I raised a lot of money. I get it. But today's world, you can go online and you can put $10,000 in a hat, and maybe you can choose the property, maybe you can't. It's all good. In my day, you had to go down to the Dean Witter office and sit in the lobby and say, oh, I'm really liking that stock that I'm watching go by on the board. How do I buy 10,000 shares or $10,000 worth of Xerox? And now you do it on your phone for $7 or maybe even free. So there's a lot of that kind of aggregation that has come to real estate. A lot of people, of course, now are talking about AI and all the insights that can help you gain. I'm a little uncertain about some of it. The fact that you can cause someone to sound like you and make calls and interact and bots and some of those kind of things. I'm not quite there yet on that. I will tell you that one of the things that's been interesting to me is that the way we're using AI is we'll send out a newsletter as an example, and I will tell Melody, I think we should address this topic. I give her the 3 main points. He loads in our last 3 newsletters and says, write a newsletter using this tone on these points. And when I get it, I'm like, this is completely not sendable. And then I edit it and I fix it and I send it back and she does her thing and off it goes. In the end of the day, that's quicker than me having said, I think we should do this. Let me start with this blank sheet of paper and see if I can figure it out. So in some cases, it's just accelerators. You're just gonna get things done faster than you could before. So some kind of still to be determined. I would say that what's happening in gig work and Upwork and the ability to get a lot of work done from remote, I think that ship has left the dock, and it's a permanent change in the way the world works right now. We've been in a intensive capital situation for the last several years, and it appears that we're going to continue to be. I recently read a book called The End of the World is Just the Beginning, and it is a very interesting read in regard to what happens over the next few years as the United States pulls back from being the global policeman. And this author's theory is it's going to make the United States that much more valuable. In other words, we can stand alone. Even if we don't choose to be the policeman, many countries will not do as well. We will. And so when I think about that, it's, oh my gosh, we haven't even seen the beginning of value in the United States real estate if you believe what this guy says. I recommend the book. You form your own opinion. So I think about what will happen as there's even more intensity and how will that work. I think some of the disruptors I talk about is what will happen to the giants, and will downturn crush Cushman and Wakefield. Some people think so. They've been trying to merge with other people. What happens when we get down? It's really amazing that our industry is dominated by Cushman, CB, and JLL, all of which are over 100 years old.
Yeah.
Just try to think about that. Think about the airlines that we're now dominated by. There's no airlines. They're very old, and the newest ones are taking over. Look at the car companies. And it's going to be really interesting to see what that evolution is like. What I think is interesting is if you'll look at the CBRE profit and loss statement over the last several years, they have moved more and more toward corporate services so that brokerage is not as great a share as it has been. So particularly with this new decision that has come out recently about, did the seller really understand that they were paying a commission of which some would go to the agent of the buyer, and that was pre-negotiated and didn't understand, wasn't transparent? You could make the case that there will be more salaried agents in the future that will work on sort of corporate assignments, that CB needs more and more worker bees to fulfill the clients that they're signing. I'm not saying CB is abandoning brokerage by any means, but compared to when I started with CB, there was no such thing as facilities management. And now we have all these advisory services, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's some evolution coming from the very top companies. We'll see what that looks like. One of the things I say in Adapt is that the big accounting companies have very strong advisory, Pricewaterhouse, Coopers, they all have very strong, Deloitte, they all have very strong, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte, they have very strong consulting businesses. And so it'll be interesting to see, I think, how that goes. But then finally, the big one is what happens when all the old white guys finally leave. And here's what I mean by that. That today, SIOR, CCIM, NAR still say that the average age of commercial real estate broker in the United States is greater than 60 years old. So most of us are going to be taking our final chips off the table. Maybe the old bumper sticker, Lord, just give me one more good cycle and I promise to be good this time. We might be at the beginning of that cycle. And so between now and say 2030, many people are going to migrate out, maybe taking their chips with them. And so I think the single biggest disruptor could be the almost complete recalibrating of the players. The baby boomers will go and we'll see who's left. And I don't mean that as a threat in any way, but I also make the case that what's been very interesting is now there's over 100 100 real estate programs at the university level, and they're turning out all these students. Guess how many of them, what proportion of them are choosing brokerage? Let's go get a master's degree in real estate and then choose brokerage.
A very small percentage.
Yeah, it's almost negligible. So we're getting more educated people, but less people want to be brokers. And so what message is that? Why would they not want to be brokers? Can't they see how much money we're making? So it's just because the demographic shift, I think, is going to be the most interesting thing over the next 10 years. All these technologies, and yet it could be we are the disruptor.
Yeah. I often think about how brokerage came into being, how real estate brokerage, commercial real estate brokerage came into being. And the thought that I have in my mind is that it's this old West town where the guy is maybe the banker or something. And he knows that this person wants to sell and this person wants to sell. And he just puts it together and takes a commission. And it was never a full profession. And then somehow it has turned into that. And it's just.
Well, Stash, treat yourself to the history of Coldwell Banker. Colbert Coldwell, Benjamin Banker, in San Francisco, immediately after the great earthquake of 1906, all these people in one of the biggest cities in the world at that time desperately needed, I need a new place, my building fell down, this or that or the other. And so they just literally put the pieces together one by another. And that's how the great CBRE started. Almost exactly as you described it.
How about that?
There you go. So we just need more earthquakes.
All right. On that, I think we'll wrap it up.
Eclipses, earthquakes,
Yeah,
climate change.
yeah.
We'll see.
Blaine, this has been awesome. It's been a lot of fun. If people are interested in reading your books or being in touch with you about coaching or consulting services, what's the best way to reach out to you?
The books are available on Amazon, all three formats: Kindle, Audible, hardcover, softcover. So you can go to Amazon, type in Blaine Strickland, and that will pop up, or you can type in Thrive, Adapt. It's pretty easy to find the books, and would always happy to interact with people on that. There's lots of reviews and good reads, and Audible, you can find all that. If you want to learn more about what we do, then it's just onemoredeal.net, onemoredeal.net. If you Google me in general or look on LinkedIn, I'm highly connected on LinkedIn, and you can find me that way too. And there's background. So I'm pretty easy to find. This is our official logo, One More Deal. The idea, that's the value proposition. If you would be willing to undertake coaching, then the return might be one more deal. What would you pay to make one more deal? That was the theory. So we'd love to interact with you. And I agree. It's been great fun. It's been great fun to be reunited. It was fun even just in the planning process of this.
Yeah, it was.
So
I appreciate it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, bud. I'll look to continue to see you in the gym. Let's keep that weightlifting going.
I'll keep it up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Grind.
Yeah, I call it fighting back. Keep fighting back.
Yeah, that's what it is. Bye.
Bye.